Anyway, let me just say this about Gary. Gary is one of the hardest hitting players for the National Recycling Coalition. Of course, for his business or his organization, Zero Waste USA. I would say he's the godfather of Zero Waste USA because of his knowledge and his background and his experience in working with not only in his state but across the United States and working exclusively with the National Recycling Coalition. Gary's a godsend. He has helped out many people understand and even has classes on how to learn more about sustainability, zero waste, and other topics that are too numerous to mention. And I'll let him talk about that in his presentation. So in order to keep on schedule, we're about 2 or 3 minutes behind. I'd like to introduce Mr. Gary Liss, the Vice President of Zero Waste and a member of the National Recycling Coalition's Board of Directors. Mr. Liss.
Thanks, Arlie. Pleasure to be here today. I wanted to highlight what zero waste is and what's happening with zero waste around the country. I always start with how many people know about reduce, reuse, recycle, and it's one of the most well-known concepts in the world. And we say that zero waste is doing reduce, reuse, recycle for real. It's focusing first, though, on the reducing and the reusing. Then recycle, compost, digest, and redesign the rest. So if we were really accomplishing reduce, reuse, recycle as it was originally envisioned, we'd be at zero waste or darn close. There's a formal definition that was adopted by the Zero Waste International Alliance, ZWIA, Z-W-I-A. And ZWIA was set up in 2002 to develop standards and definitions and policies to guide the zero waste movement. And this definition was updated a couple years ago. And it's the focusing on the conservation of all resources by means of responsible production, consumption, reuse, and recovery of products, packaging, and materials. And this is the big one, without burning. Zero waste is all about not destroying those resources, but reinvesting those resources back into the economy, back into the soil for the organics. And with no discharges to land, water, or air that threaten the environment or human health. So zero waste, by definition, the goal is zero. The measure of performance to be recognized as a zero waste facility, business, community is 90% diversion from landfills, incineration, and the environment. The goal is not to burn or bury, and no discharges to land, water, or air. One of the key drivers for zero waste has been the linkage between wasting and climate change. Landfills are one of the largest sources of greenhouse gases. The majority of the gases from landfills are methane. Methane's 21 to 72 times more potent than CO2 in creating the greenhouse effect. And that's why we need to stop the production of methane in the landfills. What produces that methane is the organics. So that's why we need to get the organics out of the landfill, both yard trimmings and food scraps and food contaminated paper. Additionally, for every ton locally in your local landfill, there's been 71 tons created along the way upstream from mining, manufacturing, and distribution of products. And it's we call that the wasteberg, that we're only seeing the tip of the wasteberg at the local landfills. It's at 71 tons upstream. That's the reason why we can't recycle our way out of this. We've got to reduce, we've got to reuse the materials as many times as possible in order to be more more efficient and have a circular economy. A number of years ago, we calculated that if all the remaining materials that were still going to landfill in California were recycled and composted, it'd be the equivalent of taking all cars off the road. And that is just an indicator. A lot of people understand that transportation is a key contributor to climate change. This is a pie chart of the looking at greenhouse gas emissions from a systems-based view. You may have seen similar pie charts where solid waste is shown as 1 to 3% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the US. And that's looking at the same data, but in a different way. In 2009, the US EPA did this analysis, and they found that 37% of all the greenhouse gas emissions were coming from the use and provision of products and packaging. And if you add in the provision of food of 13%, that's a total of 50% of all the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from areas that zero waste policies and programs can address. Local governments that have developed climate action plans have found typically 10 to 20% of their greenhouse gas emissions are coming from what could be addressed by zero waste. And the city of Fort Collins, Colorado, as an example, they found that to date, over 50% of the savings in reducing greenhouse gas emissions have come from their zero waste initiatives. And that's because zero waste is something that local governments generally control and have broad latitude in what they can do and what they can implement, whereas transportation and energy issues that are also big contributors to greenhouse gases are usually done at the state and national level, so it's much harder, and by large mega utilities, so it's much harder for local governments to influence those changes. So this all highlights that climate change is a major driver for zero waste, and zero waste can contribute significantly to addressing climate change issues. Another major driver is zero waste economics and the green jobs. A lot of people don't realize that the recycling industry is the size of the automobile industry. Back in 2001, the National Recycling Coalition got a grant from the US EPA to study the size and scope of the industry, and that was one of the conclusions that they found at that time. Since then, there have been a large number of regional, state and regional studies looking at this, and the recycling industry is huge. But if you look at, if you had 10,000 tons of materials discarded, if you landfill that or incinerate it, burn or bury it, you create one job. If you compost that same amount of material, you create 4 jobs. If you recycle that same amount of materials, you'd create 10 jobs. And if you reuse that same amount of products and packages, you'd create 75 to 250 jobs. So this highlights that zero waste is all about not just diverting tons from landfills and incinerators, but it's reinvesting those resources into the local economy for achieving the triple bottom line, for making food more available for those 1 in 6 families that don't know where their next meal is coming from, for people getting affordable office equipment and furniture and clothing from thrift stores. That's why zero waste is not just about diversion, it's also about reinvesting those resources into the local economy. And it's all about efficiency. Gil Friend from Natural Logic a number of years ago presented this slide in a talk about zero waste, and he highlighted that what they did for a living at Natural Logic was they worked with businesses to look at all the inputs that they buy, all the materials, the products, all the energy and water, all the different resources they use to make their products. And they found that of all the stuff that they bought, in this particular case, 36% contributed to the product, and the rest was wasted. Gil highlights that actually for most businesses, on average, it's 90 to 95% is wasted. That's why there can be these programs like lean manufacturing and factor 4. We can do 4 times more efficient. Factor 10, we can be 10 times more efficient. It's because we've been so wasteful for so long. And in the downturn in the economy last time in 2008, it's one of the reasons zero waste started to get a lot more interest because the businesses found that they couldn't keep things moving with selling more stuff, but they could be more efficient and decrease their costs of operations. Some of the other drivers for businesses to pursue zero waste is that every zero waste business we've identified and documented has saved money. They save the most money by reducing and eliminating wasteful practices. They save the next most by implementing reuse systems, like Toyota over 10 years saved over $1 billion by changing from a disposable shipping container to bring in parts for their manufacturing to the use of a reusable metal container to ship those parts in. It reduces liability. Right now, under CIRCLA, the Superfund, businesses are liable for whatever they produce. And when a landfill leaks, the accountants, engineers, and attorneys get together and look at who contributed how much stuff, and then they send them a bill for the cleanup based on the amount of materials they landfilled. It increases the efficiency we just highlighted. It reduces the greenhouse gas emissions. It provides a marketing edge. A lot of businesses are selling themselves as green businesses, sustainable businesses. Zero waste is in that arena of helping people to distinguish themselves as progressive companies. They can produce clean energy, and by clean energy, we mean energy that's not created by destroying the resources by burning, but rather by digesting, like anaerobic digestion, where the bugs eat the garbage and produce the methane, which is in a controlled environment able to be used for different types of energy uses. Zero waste initiatives also save energy, 3 to 5 times more energy than could be produced by burning the same amount of material. It reduces the litter to oceans and watersheds. This is probably one of the biggest drivers today for legislation all over the country and all over the world to get the plastics out of the oceans, out of the waterways. That's become a real scourge on on the earth. And zero waste programs support eliminating wasteful products and packaging because of that. And it's the right thing to do. It helps attract employees and can keep employees. Green businesses, sustainable businesses document that they hold on to their employees longer than other companies. And in today's environment where people are scrambling for jobs and changing jobs, it's an additional benefit of a company having adopted zero waste as a goal. When we do audits of zero waste businesses, we interview the employees in those businesses. And many of the businesses, the employees have said, we love working for a company that shares our values. And that's really an important thing to keep people going at a particular business. Communities get all these benefits. It reduces the climate change, creates green jobs, develops local markets, promotes local sustainability, assists local businesses with all the benefits we just went over, promotes local food and getting nutrients back to the soil, and promotes the health of residents. There's communities all over the world that are pursuing zero waste. The leader right now is Italy, with over 200 communities having adopted zero waste. And in Europe, over 350 communities in Europe have adopted zero waste. In the US, we have a list of about 100 that have adopted zero waste around the country, including all the major East Coast cities, Seattle, San Francisco, all the major cities in California, um, uh, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Sacramento, have all adopted it. On the East Coast, all the major cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, Atlanta, Boston, New York, Washington, D.C. have adopted zero waste as a goal. Major cities in Texas and Colorado are on the leading edge as well. These are communities that have adopted the goal, not necessarily have achieved it. Um, when we talk about zero waste, sometimes, particularly in the earlier days, people might roll their eyes and say, yeah, not in my lifetime, and thinking that it's not attainable. But nature is the model. There are no landfills or incinerators in nature. When we can't figure out what to do in terms of reduce, reuse, recycle, I always say, well, what would nature do? And there's all sorts of analyses available through ZERI and the blue economy and biomimicry that are working on these very opportunities. These are the new business opportunities of the future, figuring out how nature does it when you confront a problem and things are being wasted and you don't know what to do. See how it's handled in nature. And mentioned earlier, the performance measure of achieving zero waste is 90%, to divert 90% from landfills, incineration, and the environment. Um, Businesses are leading the way to zero waste. This is one of the great things that we found along the way. One of the first presentations we organized was at the National Recycling Congress in Albuquerque around 1998. And just blew everyone away to find all these businesses that had already diverted over 90% of their materials from landfills, incineration, and environment. On this list, the ones that are asterisks with the red asterisk have been certified as doing that under the U.S. Green Building Council Green Business Certification, Inc. True Zero Waste Program. True stands for Total Resource Use and Efficiency. And I'm an assessor for that program and helped in doing audits of a number of these facilities. But there's large facilities, small facilities, electronic facilities, organic facilities, facilities in San Francisco where they made it cheaper and more convenient to go to zero waste by the city providing the services and changing the rate structure to enhance people pursuing that. There's all different stories behind each of these. One of my favorites is General Motors. With 117 plants around the world achieving 97% diversion and saving $1 billion a year is just really impressive statistics that they've shared in other settings. One example of an assessment that I was involved with was the Chu Hall at UC Berkeley at the Haas Business School, which got certified as a true zero waste facility in 2018, diverting 95% of their materials from landfills, incineration, and environment. And it's a $60 million facility, 80,000 square feet. And one of the distinguishing characteristics is there's no trash bins in the building. And so part of their message is pack it in, pack it out. And you may have heard that phrase before. There's actually an organization now that says leave no trace, lnt.org. they can help communities and other places develop programs to leave no trace, to encourage people to think about what they're discarding, where they're discarding it, and in the future, not to buy stuff that will become wasted if they can't figure it out. So Chew Hall is a great example. Another one that I love, largely because of this halftime show. Some of you may recognize the venue, Ohio State. This was back when we had a U.S. Zero Waste Business Conference in Cincinnati in 2013, and we had Corey Hockey from the Ohio State University talk about their diversion efforts at the stadium. And they highlighted that back in 2012, they had achieved an 87% diversion rate, and that the went over 90% for the last game of the season. And I just love the graphic on the field for the halftime show. Thought you guys would appreciate it in Ohio. The U.S. Green Building Council True Zero Waste Rating System was developed by the U.S. Zero Waste Business Council, which I helped to form back in 2012. I was the first president of that, and it has 81 credits, only 5 of which are dealing with diversion, the actual achieving of the 90% or more diversion from landfills, incineration, and the environment. The rest is all about rethinking, redesigning, reducing, reusing, using leadership and training people, analyzing the streams, and achieving a closed loop system and innovating. That's what zero waste is all about. It's trying to go beyond recycling to the next generation. Your neighbor, Indiana, just announced today that they're renaming their recycling association in Indiana from the Indiana Recycling Council to Circular Indiana. And that's because they're trying to go beyond recycling to upstream to reduce, reuse, repair, and rethink and redesign. One of the questions is, can we afford zero waste? And I highlighted earlier that every zero waste business we've documented has saved money. And they've saved it by reducing, the most money is saved by reducing and eliminating wasteful practices. The next through reuse, and then recycling and composting if the rate structures are set up right by the waste haulers and or the community. It's a decentralized approach, and businesses will save money by product and process improvements, eliminating wasteful practices, and more reuse, recycling, and composting. If we don't design for zero waste, the mining and manufacturing and distribution impacts will continue. And how many tons was that upstream? 71 tons for every ton locally. That's the wasteberg that we showed earlier. The landfill and incinerator impacts will continue, and the liabilities under CERCLA, the Superfund bill, will continue for all those contributing to that. We would need 3 to 6 more planets for the U.S. lifestyle to be replicated around the world. And as others strive for that, we need to become more efficient. And zero waste is a tool for helping people find how they can become more efficient. One of the key to that is the zero waste hierarchy of highest and best use. It's actually a 4-page document at zwea.org. Highlighting the ins and outs of what choices to make on technologies to rethink, redesign, reduce, and reuse all the upstream activity, to recycle, compost, recover the materials through other than source separation activities, and to manage residuals properly and not to incinerate or burn anything is what zero waste is all about. It also goes into looking at the amount of materials, the types of materials that are being discarded. And this is a slide that was done early on by Bill Sheehan from the Product Policy Project that is now upstream. And what he highlighted is that it's the products and the packaging that's been accelerating out of control that the current solid waste system really wasn't designed for the toxicity and the nature of those products and packages. So that's why we are calling for redesigning products for the environment. Some of you may recall the flip tabs on the cans, aluminum beverage cans, way back in the 60s and 70s, and they were littering all over the world. And someone innovated and came up with the opener that stayed on the can. There's a new effort to connect the cap similarly on plastic bottles. And in Europe, they've adopted policies to that effect. We're trying to do that in this country, and there's some innovators that are already implemented it on some of their plastic bottles. There are a variety of product policies, including product bans, material bans, mandatory takebacks, advanced recycling fees, fees on bags, rebates like auto battery core fee has a 97% return rate because people get a $7 to $15 core fee back when they bring their old battery to get a new battery at an auto store. Bottle bills are providing great clean materials at twice the recovery rate as other types of recycling programs. Extended producer responsibility, getting producers to take at least fiscal responsibility, if not physical responsibility. And cradle to cradle product design, clean production. There's all these different tools that are available for folks to address these issues. With EPR policies, extended producer responsibilities, we're working to advocate that incentives be included to redesign products to be less toxic and easier to reuse and recycle. They're now calling these eco-modulated fees as one of the key tools that are being implemented in new EPR programs. We're trying to make sure that the EPR programs don't export, harm, and properly reuse, recycle, or compost. A lot of EPR programs have been burning materials, which is not the desire from a zero waste perspective. We also are looking for supporting small local business, nonprofits, and local government roles. One of the two first state EPR laws adopted for packaging in this country in Maine is a municipal reimbursement model where the products and packages will be charged fees that will then support existing municipal recycling programs in that state. When you look at zero waste, the types of things we're talking about are a combination of physical and social infrastructure. On physical, we're talking about everyone having access, universal access to recycling and composting services for residents, businesses, industries, institutions, and schools. And having good processing capacity, state-of-the-art processing for recycling, organics, including food scraps and food contaminated paper, and construction and demolition debris. Separation of the materials is key. These are examples of an office environment with clear signage on and above the containers. Social infrastructure talks about getting the right economic incentives through the rate structure, having new rules and incentives to help encourage businesses and generators to do the right thing through the types of product policies we just highlighted. We're striving for culture change and recognizing that it takes 7 to 15 times before of messaging before people will change their attitudes and change their behavior particularly. So that's going to require a very comprehensive community-based social marketing program and all sorts of tools to achieve that, and providing technical assistance along the way to residents, businesses, and institutions. There's huge opportunity for connecting and helping green businesses to expand, attract, and support them, producing many green collar jobs. And to do that, it's important to reserve land for zero waste infrastructure as cities are developing. This was a big issue in Oakland, California, when we did the zero waste plan there more than a decade ago, and in Boston most recently, that was where we did a zero waste plan. That was a big issue. It's all about reinvesting the resources locally, particularly on the reuse side, as I mentioned earlier, and developing new markets is a key part of what Zero Waste is advocating for. One of the best things that's happened in recent years is China's Green Fence and National Sword has focused everyone on producing quality materials and recycling right. A lot of the recycling businesses and the paper mills and metal manufacturing mills lost out to larger, more modern facilities that opened up around 2000 in China and elsewhere. And because they had also low cost labor, they were able to sort a lot of contaminated materials from the quality materials to feed their facilities. With China's increasingly stringent rules about markets, all of a sudden everyone is focused on producing quality materials. And if we produce quality materials, we can reopen many of the closed mills in this country and expand and invest in mills in this country because we don't need the labor to hand sort through the contamination. So quality is for the materials being produced is resulting in major investments in new mills in the United States now. Ironically, some of it investments are coming from China as well. One of the tools for evaluating how to proceed is this community planning checklist that is on the zerowasteusa.org website. And it highlights different policies, programs, and facilities or infrastructure that other communities have implemented that would contribute to your zero waste programs. And it's designed as a checklist for you to basically check off the ones you've got, and the ones that you don't, you can highlight the ones that you are in development or that you'd like to pursue as part of a zero waste plan. That checklist was actually the beginning of a website we helped develop for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency called Managing and Transforming Waste Streams that has over 100 policies and programs communities can implement to reduce waste and pursue zero waste in their communities. It has over 350 examples of actual contracts, policies, ordinances, programs, graphics from around the country as part of that website. So you can go there and find examples of what you'd like to do. And it's a searchable Excel database that you can search for the type of programs that you're most interested in. For businesses, there's principles adopted by the Zero Waste International Alliance. In addition to the diversion goals of 90%, these are other things that to be a good zero waste business, and these are embodied in the true zero waste rating system. These are other ways of looking at what it means to be going towards zero waste. As part of the zero waste plans that we do, we always have an economic analysis. And again, all the businesses we found have saved money. Communities may need to invest in new programs, but the sweet spot is for communities to adopt policies that guide the investment of the marketplace. And C&D ordinances are a great example of that. In California, virtually no public investment has been made in construction and demolition processing facilities. Instead, communities adopted requirements that any business developing new facilities, any contractors, any developers must achieve a certain recycling rate. And those recycling rates require services to be provided to the developers to achieve those goals. Um, all of this will result in the zero waste economy with clean production, retailers taking back products from the consumers, consumers making wise choices, both residents and businesses, that help stimulate the demand for the businesses to create the right stuff, with producers being responsible, taking back their products and redesigning theirs, creating lots of jobs, changing the rules when things aren't being pursued for zero waste and there's problems. Zero wasters say just because it's been done that way for many years doesn't mean you have to continue to do that. If the state requires you to do it, change that rule. If the feds require you to do something, change that rule. That's part of what zero waste is all about, and shifting subsidies from wasting and designing for the environment. A couple of key lessons for pursuing zero waste. Someone has to ask to adopt it. In different communities, that's been an environmental group, a staff member, an elected official, the state challenging them to pursue zero waste, connecting to other problems, promoting local zero waste businesses. And in almost every community we've been in, there's high performing recycling businesses. And whether they're at 70, 80% or over the 90% threshold to be considered zero waste, those are the ones to promote and show that it can be done in your area, and figure out how they did it and replicate that with others. There's lots of trainings available on how to pursue this in more depth. Zero Waste USA, greeneducation.us has a variety of online training, and the True Advisor program is also available online. There's lots of resources out there. The Zero Waste USA and Zero Waste International Alliance are some of the key ones. True has some really great information on their rating system and example projects from around the country. The last couple of minutes, I'm just going to highlight an example. One of the latest zero waste plans we've developed, the Fair Development Plan for Zero Waste in Baltimore, developed by the community, guided by our contract was with United Workers, which is an environmental and labor organization that got a grant to develop a zero waste plan. Was helped by the Office of Sustainability, and we met throughout the city with lots of people. And what we heard, there was an urgency because they have an incinerator called the Bresco Incinerator that's causing $55 million a year of health impacts that were documented in a study for those who are close to the incinerator. And they have a 40% asthma rate in Baltimore. So there was an urgency of closing down that incinerator. They blocked a new incinerator from being built. They successfully blocked that, but they keep getting dumped on, and that's an unacceptable inequity. And there's not universal recycling. There's no recycling of public housing. Many parts of the city that are low income don't get the basic curbside recycling programs. They're working to change that now, partly in response to the zero waste plan and other plans there. The environmental injustice of all this solid waste incinerator and landfill and other facilities concentrated at that lower corner of the right of the Baltimore city shows the poor and black communities bearing most of the burdens in that area. Destiny Watford fought the proposed major new incinerator in Baltimore and got a Goldman Environmental Prize, which is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for environmentalists. And some of the guiding principles there in the Zero Waste Plan were universality, equity, everyone participating, have everything be transparent, and holding everyone accountable. With a bridge strategy,
Willie, I think you might have muted Gary.
Yeah, I'm now unmuted.
There you go.
Thank you. Well, I'm just assuming you can see from the bullets on this slide what I was talking about there.
Yeah, we only lost about 15 seconds, Gary.
Okay, great. The last piece is on Recycling's Infrastructure 2. This is a campaign of the National Recycling Coalition, Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and Zero Waste USA. With all the talk about infrastructure, particularly this year, we've been coalescing folks that are working on the campaign to get recycling funding in the infrastructure bills. National Recycling Coalition drafted the America Recycling Infrastructure Plan, proposing 16 billion over 3 years and fees to cover all the costs of providing that funding to communities and businesses, with 50 different initiatives, building on other advocacy plans by other organizations that have been working in this space for a number of years. So this is an effort to get things in the legislation that's going forward. The bipartisan bill that's supposed to be signed into law today does include hundreds of millions of dollars to implement some recycling around the country, particularly in implementing the Save Our Seas Act 2.0 that was adopted last year by Congress. In addition, in the bipartisan bill, up to $6 billion is there for investing in new research into batteries and battery recycling. And that's in recognition that our infrastructure is being burnt down now by lithium ion battery fires. And we need to address that. The infrastructure bill is taking that on. One of the things that our campaign is asking people to do is to use reuse systems, recycled content, and compost products in all infrastructure projects. So even if it's not funding recycling facilities, any infrastructure project we're advocating could use reuse systems, recycled content, and compost products. And we ask you to contact your U.S. Senator and Congressperson to advocate that that gets as eligible activities in these bills, and that they champion that by the agencies when they write up their guidelines and regulations to implement those bills, to make sure that all infrastructure contributes to creating the demand for our services in this industry. We have a number of resources available and got some great media coverage in the early days in May and June and July for the campaign. We've set up a Google group, listserv recycling infrastructure at googlegroups.com, for people to get in the loop on all the details that are happening, and are doing a number of monthly webinars, and participated in the National Recycling Congress a couple of weeks ago. We'll be at the National Zero Waste Conference coming up in a couple weeks, and in 2022, the webinars will focus on industrial investment opportunities, waste surcharges, how to apply for infrastructure grants. We hope by March we'll know more details of how to do that, and talking about resource recovery parks as an example of how to make infrastructure more efficient and effective in communities. So the National Zero Waste Conference, just encourage you all to join. The first day is on focusing on zero waste businesses, the second day on zero waste communities. I always close my presentations with, if you're not for zero waste, how much waste are you for? And when we're in person, we turn that around and ask everyone to say how much waste they're for. So Willie, could you unmute everyone? I'm going to try that virtually and see how that goes. So let me know when you've unmuted everyone, Willie. Could you do that? Well, doesn't look like it. Okay, we'll do that in the Q&A. Ready for any questions, or you can go on to next presentation. Back to you, Arlie.
Yeah, I have a quick question. The last slide or two, you mentioned that you're going to have a workshop on how to apply for the infrastructure grant.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I guess my question is, before you take that step, and I mentioned this to Bob, you have to be pre-qualified to apply for any federal grants, and there's some things that you have. I don't know them all. Other people probably listening in, like Emoja and Caroline, who was with the okay, Caroline may know those procedures. But when I was working with Ohio EPA, I used to be a peer grant review individual for that team, and there are certain ways that and certain language and that you have to use in order to actually submit an effective grant, and including including budget and so forth. But before you can even get into that, and like I said, I talked to Bob a little bit on his call, was that you have to have certain things before you're able to apply for a federal grant. Would that be able to be worked into that application workshop, how to apply for an infrastructure grant, you think?
That's exactly what we're talking about. Is
Okay.
once the bills are adopted this year, hopefully, it's going to take some writing of regulations and guidelines of how to apply, whether they have requests for proposals, how it's all going to be structured. It's optimistic for us to think that they'll have that figured out by March, but there's a lot of pressure on the federal government to do on the ground improvements before next November, if you get the drift.
Yeah.
So we're optimistic that we'll have some guidance by March on how to apply and pre-qualification issues like you're addressing. But an example of that is in California, we got a $5 million U.S. Department of Labor grant for setting up a recycling and resource management training program from the U.S. Department of Labor back during the Obama administration. And the Obama administration wanted to get Department of Labor to work with community colleges to go beyond some of the workforce training programs that they had running apart from the colleges, to bring the community colleges into the fore. And we worked with Santa Monica College, who had a grants person who was an expert in all those pre-qualification issues, who understood the exact words to say to get the Department of Labor interested. And then a couple of us gave them the recycling and resource management language on the content and the substance of what we were trying to train on. And it was that combination that worked. So you're exactly right. So what you should be looking for right now is, where are those grants experts locally? I bet your colleges, your community colleges, some institutions who get grants regularly will have someone on staff, and identifying those folks and developing projects with them may be one of the huge opportunities coming up over this next year. And this is just the beginning. This administration is committed to make a generational change. Throughout the administration, it's likely to be advocating for more bills. There's the Compost Act, the Zero Food Waste Act, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, the Reduce Act. There's lots of acts pending in Congress. There's more interest in Congress now than there's been in decades. So it's likely the combination of circumstances is bringing these issues to the fore. It's likely that there's more stuff coming, and we hope to be part of helping people understand what those things are, advocating for them, and then championing getting people those funds.
Any other questions from anyone?
If anybody has any questions, they can just unmute themselves.
Yeah, Gary, this is Umoja. Great
Okay.
presentation. I wanted to get the full name for Miss Destiny, the young lady in Baltimore.
Yeah.
The award, I didn't get a chance to actually
Yes.
get her name. Okay.
Destiny Watford, and Google her. It's an inspiring story. And the Goldman Environmental Awards have recognized a number of zero waste leaders through the years. Rossano Ercolini from Italy was one of the ones before Destiny. There's some great stories at the Goldman Environmental Prize website. If Willie's allowed everyone to unmute themselves, I do want to ask the question I mentioned before. So if everyone could unmute yourselves, I'm going to do a test run. I want to find out, how much waste are you for? So you're supposed to answer either a number or...
Zero.
All right, there we go.
No way.
Okay.
I gotta scratch my head on that one.
Okay, so now that you got the drill, let's try it again. How much waste are you for?
Zero.
Okay, so when we're doing this in person, we usually want to make sure that the people down the hall are hearing what's going on. So I'm going to try one more time. How much waste are you for?
Zero.
Okay, thank you.
Gary, you could stop share.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it, buddy.
My pleasure.
All right,
And
man.
thanks for your leadership.